Martin Hensley always thought his life would amount to nothing more than a series of delivery routes, a rotating cast of questionable roommates, and enough sarcasm to fill a minor lake. He was fine with it, comfortable even. He'd long ago accepted that his big life moments would be limited to things like winning free nachos at trivia night or finally fixing the leaky faucet in his apartment. Grand adventures? Alien royalty? Forget it. And yet, there he was, standing in the middle of an upscale auction house that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a Bond movie, holding a crumpled package of unknown origin in one hand and trying very hard not to panic. His audience consisted of 3 impeccably dressed bidders glaring at him like he'd spilled coffee on their priceless rugs, a receptionist who was clearly regretting letting him in, and, most distressingly, a tall, striking woman in an understated silver cloak who had been staring at him with unnerving intensity for the past 5 minutes. It all started that morning when Martin's boss, a perpetually frazzled man named Jerry, threw an unmarked package into Martin's hands and barked, "You've got one more stop, and try not to embarrass the company this time, okay?" "I didn't embarrass anyone," Martin had replied, offended. The guy laughed. "Calling a billionaire's yacht a floating tax dodge isn't customer service, Martin," Jerry had snapped. "Accurate, though," Martin muttered under his breath, but he didn't press his luck. Jerry's patience with him was as thin as the tread on Martin's sneakers. The address turned out to be the high-end auction house he was now standing in, delivering what looked suspiciously like a high-security package. He didn't ask questions. It was one of those places where questions weren't welcome. All he had to do was hand it off, sign the receipt, and leave. Simple. Except nothing was ever simple when Martin was involved. After awkwardly waiting by the receptionist's desk for someone to collect the package, his natural urge to fill the silence with bad jokes kicked in. "So, do you guys sell anything I could afford? Or is it all $1,000,000 knickknacks? Like, got any used toasters or—" The receptionist didn't even blink. "We sell only the rarest and most valuable artifacts in the galaxy." "Artifacts, huh? Cool. So, like, alien stuff?" "Yes." Martin froze mid-grin. "Wait, seriously?" Before he could process what he'd just heard, one of the bidders, a pompous-looking man with a suit so sharp it could probably cut glass, strolled over and sniffed disdainfully at Martin's scuffed jacket and perpetually messy hair. "What's this? Another Earthling delivery boy?" Martin smiled nervously, gripping the package a little tighter. "Yep, that's me, Earthling delivery boy, here to ruin your day. Nice to meet you." The man sneered. "Do you even know where you are? This auction is for the most discerning collectors in the galaxy, not whatever you are." Martin's brain, ever the masochist, decided this was the perfect moment to go full sarcasm. "Oh, I know exactly where I am, and trust me, I'm totally qualified. I watched like 3 episodes of Star Trek last week, so I'm basically an expert on alien cultures now." The bidder didn't seem to appreciate the joke. His face turned an alarming shade of purple as the woman in the silver cloak stepped forward, her piercing gaze fixed on Martin like he was the most interesting thing in the room. "You are bold," she said, her voice low and melodic. "Or foolish." Martin turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "I get that a lot. Bold and foolish are kind of my whole thing. But, hi, can I help you?" She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, Earthling, do you mock everything you don't understand?" "Only the stuff that's terrifying," Martin replied without missing a beat. To his surprise, the woman smiled. It was a small smile, but it was there. The tension in the room shifted slightly as she continued to watch him, her silver cloak catching the light with every movement. Martin, desperate to diffuse the awkwardness, decided to double down on his usual brand of self-deprecating humor. "You know, if you're here to bid on ancient alien artifacts, you should probably avoid talking to me. My most valuable possession is a toaster that only works half the time, and even that's pushing it." He made a dramatic gesture, mimicking some kind of regal salute, intending it as a joke. Unfortunately, The woman's expression shifted instantly. Her smile vanished, replaced by something sharper, almost predatory. The entire room went silent. "What?" Martin asked, glancing around. "What did I do?" The woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Do you realize what you've just done?" Made a fool of myself. Again. "That gesture," she said, her voice suddenly colder. "It is the formal proposal of marriage in my culture." Martin blinked. "Wait, what?" "I am Queen Cytherea of Zalvona," she continued, as if that explained anything. "And I accept your proposal." For a long moment, Martin just stood there staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Then, very quietly, he said, "You've got to be kidding me." No one laughed. "Okay, look," Martin said, holding up his hands in surrender. "There's been a huge misunderstanding here. I wasn't proposing to anyone, least of all an alien queen. No offense." "None taken," Cytherea replied smoothly. "But the proposal has been made, and I have accepted. It is done." "It's... what now?" "It is done," she repeated, her tone making it clear this was not up for debate. Martin looked around the room, hoping someone would jump in and explain this was all an elaborate prank. No such luck. He turned back to Cytherea, his voice rising in pitch. "But I can't marry you. I'm just a guy, a delivery guy. I don't even have health insurance." Cytherea tilted her head, her expression softening just slightly. "Your honesty is refreshing, but it changes nothing. You will come with me to Zalvona, and we will formalize the union." Martin gaped at her. "Zalvona? Is that a planet or a furniture store?" Her lips twitched, almost like she was suppressing another smile. "You'll find out soon enough." And with that, Martin Hensley's life was officially turned upside down. Martin Hensley never thought his life would include an impromptu trip to an alien starship, let alone as the accidental fiancé of an intergalactic monarch. And yet here he was, seated in a ridiculously plush chair aboard a spacecraft that looked like it had been designed by a luxury car manufacturer with an unlimited budget. The walls glowed faintly, casting a soft, silvery light, and every surface was smooth, seamless, and impossibly clean. Somewhere in the distance, a gentle hum resonated through the ship, a sound that Martin suspected wasn't mechanical so much as alive. He tried not to think too hard about that. Instead, he focused on the plate of unfamiliar food in front of him. The Zalvonian equivalent of a welcoming snack, it looked like a cross between sushi and jelly beans. Martin poked it cautiously with the alien fork he'd been given, which had an unsettling number of prongs. Cytherea sat across from him, regal as ever, her silver cloak folded neatly over her shoulders. If the strangeness of the situation fazed her at all, she didn't show it. Her posture was perfect, her expression calm, and her piercing blue-green eyes were fixed squarely on him. "You haven't touched your meal," she said, breaking the silence. I wasn't sure which part was edible," Martin replied, managing an awkward grin. "Or if any of it was edible, really. Is this like actual food, or is it decorative?" Cytherea raised an elegant eyebrow. "It is entirely edible." "Great," Martin said, though his tone suggested otherwise. He picked up the alien fork and speared a piece that wobbled slightly on impact. "Just so you know, if this kills me, I'm going to haunt you." To his surprise, Cytherea chuckled softly. "I assure you, it is perfectly safe for earthling digestion." Martin popped the morsel into his mouth, bracing for disaster. Instead, he was hit with a burst of flavor that was somehow both sweet and savory, with a hint of citrus and something he couldn't quite place. He blinked. "Okay, that's actually really good. Weird, but good." "I'm pleased you approve," Cytherea said, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely sure if she should take that as a compliment. For a moment, they ate in relative silence, the atmosphere hovering somewhere between awkward and surreal. Martin kept sneaking glances at Cytherea, trying to wrap his head around the fact that this was his fiancée, or queen fiancé, or whatever the proper term was. She was tall, poised, and intimidatingly beautiful, with a presence that made him feel like a scruffy house cat in the presence of a lion. "So," he said finally, setting his fork down, "this whole proposal thing, are we sure there's no way to undo it? Like maybe there's a loophole or something?" Cytherea's gaze sharpened slightly. "In Zalvonian culture, a formal proposal is a binding agreement. It is not taken lightly." Right, Martin said quickly. "But hypothetically, what if one of the people involved was, completely clueless and had no idea what they were doing? Doesn't that count as like grounds for annulment?" Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You underestimate the significance of your actions, Martin Hensley. A proposal is not merely a gesture, it is a promise, one that cannot be undone without dire consequences." "Dire consequences," Martin echoed, leaning back in his chair. "That's vague and ominous. Can you elaborate? Or is this one of those things where I just have to trust you and hope I don't get vaporized?" "Your humor is peculiar," Cytherea said, tilting her head slightly. "But it is not without merit." Thanks," Martin said, scratching the back of his neck. "I think?" She studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "I understand this is overwhelming for you. It is not customary for an earthling to be thrust into such a role, but you have shown courage, however unintentional it may have been. That is not something to be dismissed." Martin blinked. "Courage? Me? I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a delivery driver who can't keep his mouth shut." "And yet, here you are," Cytherea said simply. Martin opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a soft chime echoed through the room. Cytherea's attention shifted to the far wall, where a translucent panel flickered to life, displaying a series of intricate symbols that Martin couldn't begin to decipher. "Ah," she said, rising gracefully to her feet. "We are nearing Zalvonian space. It is time for you to prepare." "Prepare for what?" Martin asked, his stomach sinking. "To meet the royal court," Cytherea replied, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Martin groaned, slumping back in his chair. Of course, the royal court, because this situation wasn't stressful enough already. Cytherea regarded him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and pity. "You may wish to reconsider your choice of attire," she added, gesturing subtly to his rumpled jacket and faded jeans. Martin glanced down at himself and sighed. "Yeah, I figured. Got a royal wardrobe lying around somewhere. Maybe something in my size?" Cytherea's lips twitched, and for the briefest moment Martin could have sworn she was trying not to laugh. "Follow me," she said, turning toward the doorway. He hesitated for a moment, then got to his feet and followed her, muttering under his breath, "Worst engagement ever." The rest of the journey passed in a blur of confusion, mild panic, and far too many shiny corridors. By the time they reached Zalvona, Martin's nerves were shot, and he was starting to regret every decision that had led him to this point. The ship descended smoothly onto a massive landing platform that glittered like polished obsidian. Outside, Martin caught glimpses of towering spires, floating gardens, and a sky that shimmered with colors he didn't have names for. "Welcome to Zalvona," Cytherea said, her tone carrying a hint of pride. Martin stared out the window, his jaw hanging open. "It's beautiful." "It is my home," Cytherea said simply. Before Martin could respond, the ship's doors opened, and a flood of alien figures awaited them. Some were humanoid, others less so, and all of them were dressed in elaborate, shimmering garments that made Martin feel even more out of place. As they stepped out onto the platform, the crowd parted to reveal a trio of stern-faced advisors. The one in the center, an older man with silver hair and an air of authority, stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth and formal. "We have been awaiting your return." His gaze flickered to Martin, and his expression shifted ever so slightly. somewhere between disbelief and disdain. "And this," the advisor added, "must be the Earthling." Martin gave an awkward wave. "Hi. Yep, that's me, the Earthling. Nice to meet you." Cytheria's voice was calm but firm as she addressed her advisors. "Prepare the court. There is much to discuss." As they moved forward, Martin leaned closer to Cytheria and whispered, "Just so we're clear, I'm probably going to embarrass you. A lot." To his surprise, she smiled. "I would expect nothing less." Martin Hensley's first impression of the Zalvonian royal court was that it looked like the universe's fanciest aquarium had decided to host a political summit. The grand hall where he stood stretched impossibly high, its walls a kaleidoscope of swirling lights and colors that gave the impression of being submerged underwater. Massive crystal columns shimmered in shades of blue and gold, casting a soft glow on the ornate floor beneath his feet. Around him, dozens of alien dignitaries, courtiers, and guards moved with a precision that made Martin feel like he was crashing an event way out of his league. Which, to be fair, he absolutely was. The courtiers were dressed in outfits that seemed to defy both gravity and good taste, with layers of flowing fabric, glowing jewels, and metallic accents that shimmered with every movement. Martin, in stark contrast, had been outfitted in what Cytheria had assured him was a formal Earthling-inspired ensemble. To Martin, it looked like a mix between a tuxedo and something a space wizard might wear. The long dark coat trailed behind him like a cape, and the intricate silver embroidery on the lapels made him feel like he'd wandered onto the set of an intergalactic fashion show. He wasn't sure if it made him look dignified or ridiculous, but either way, it didn't matter. The moment he stepped into the hall beside Cytheria, every pair of eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, turned to him. Hi," Martin said, giving a small, awkward wave. The room remained utterly silent. Cytheria, ever composed, stepped forward and addressed the gathered crowd. "Honored members of the court," she began, her voice clear and commanding, "I return to you with unexpected news. By the customs of our people, I have accepted a formal proposal of union. Allow me to introduce my chosen consort, Martin Hensley of Earth." The silence that followed was so intense, Martin could have sworn he heard his own heartbeat. Then, all at once, the room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some of the courtiers seemed outraged, others merely bewildered. A few, to Martin's relief, appeared amused, though whether that was at his expense he couldn't tell. The same advisor who had greeted them at the landing platform, a tall, stern man named Varen, stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet the room. The crowd's voices fell to murmurs as he addressed Cytheria. "Your Majesty," Varen said, his tone measured but clearly skeptical, "if I may speak candidly, this Earthling does not appear to understand the gravity of his position. Are we to believe that this—" He paused, as if searching for the least insulting term. "Individual is to stand beside you as consort and potential co-ruler?" "Potential what now?" Martin blurted out, his voice rising in panic. He turned to Cytheria. "You didn't mention anything about co-ruling. I thought this was more of a ceremonial thing, like, hey, look, I'm married to a queen, but I still get to go home and binge-watch TV." Cytheria's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile threatening to break through her otherwise stoic expression. "As my consort, you will, in time, share certain responsibilities. It is not merely ceremonial." Martin stared at her, his brain struggling to process the words. "You've got to be kidding me." "I assure you," Cytheria said, her tone calm, "I am not." Before Martin could spiral any further, Varen stepped in, his expression darkening. "Your Majesty," he said, "this matter cannot be decided so lightly. The court must deliberate. The future of Zalvona is at stake, and we cannot afford to take unnecessary risks." Martin felt a pang of relief. Finally, someone was talking sense. "Yes, deliberate. Take all the time you need. Weeks, months, years even. No rush." The crowd erupted into murmurs again. and Cytherea raised a hand to silence them. "The court may deliberate," she said firmly, "but know this. The decision has been made. Martin Hensley is my chosen consort, and I will not entertain challenges to his place at my side." Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and the room fell silent once more. Even Varen looked momentarily taken aback, though he quickly masked it with a curt nod. "As you wish, Your Majesty," he said, though the tension in his voice was unmistakable. The formalities concluded, Cytherea turned to Martin and gestured for him to follow her. Relieved to escape the oppressive stares of the court, Martin trailed after her as they exited the grand hall and entered a quieter, more private corridor. "Okay," Martin said as soon as they were alone. "I know I've said this like 10 times already, but what the hell is going on?" "You are fulfilling the role of my consort," Cytherea replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "Yeah, I got that part," Martin said. "But why me? I mean, there's got to be a ton of eligible alien bachelors out there who would kill for this job. Why not pick one of them?" Cytherea stopped walking and turned to face him. "Do you truly believe this is a role anyone would desire?" Martin hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden intensity in her voice. "Well, yeah. You're a queen. That's kind of a big deal." "Being queen is not a privilege," Cytherea said quietly. "It is a duty, a burden, and those who stand beside me must bear it as well." Martin frowned, unsure how to respond. He'd always thought of royalty as glamorous and exciting, the kind of life most people could only dream of, but the look in Cytherea's eyes told a different story, one of weight and isolation that he couldn't begin to understand. "Okay," he said after a moment, "but that still doesn't explain why me. I'm just a guy. I'm not special or brave or, well, anything really. I'm the furthest thing from a royal consort you could possibly find." Cytherea's expression softened, and for the first time Martin saw a hint of vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "You underestimate yourself," she said. "When you proposed, intentionally or not, you showed courage and sincerity, qualities that are far too rare in those who seek power." Martin snorted. "Yeah, well, don't get used to it. Most of the time, I'm more of a run away and make bad jokes kind of guy." Cytherea's lips curved into a small, almost reluctant smile. "Perhaps, but you are here nonetheless, and that, Martin Hensley, is more than enough for now." Her words lingered in the air as they continued down the corridor, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Martin felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name, something that felt almost like hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this after all. The next morning, or at least what Martin assumed was morning, given the faintly golden light spilling through the intricate, glowing lattice of Cytherea's royal chambers, he woke to the realization that this wasn't a weird dream. It was his life now. He lay sprawled on what could only be described as the most unnecessarily comfortable bed in existence, surrounded by soft, weightless fabrics that seemed to shift and shimmer with his every movement. The ceiling above him was a mosaic of constellations, gently pulsating in time with some unseen rhythm. For a moment, he marveled at the sheer beauty of it all before the memories of the previous day came crashing back in. "Oh, right," he muttered, covering his face with a hand. "I accidentally got engaged to an alien queen. Awesome." A gentle chime interrupted his self-pity, and the far wall shimmered as a door slid open. Cytherea entered, looking as composed and radiant as ever. She was dressed in a sleek silver robe that caught the light in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. "Good morning, Martin," she said, her tone calm, but carrying an edge of amusement. "Morning?" Martin sat up, his hair sticking out at odd angles. "Is it actually morning, or is time just whatever you want it to be on this ship?" "Zalvona operates on a standardized rotational cycle," Cytherea replied, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "So, yes, it is morning. For you, at least." Martin groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Great. I'm on alien time now. What's next? Breakfast? A tour? Another round of, let's all stare at the weird Earth guy in the royal court? Cytherea tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Today you will begin your orientation. Orientation? Martin repeated, frowning. That sounds suspiciously like school. Please tell me I don't have to do homework. Not quite, Cytherea said, her tone betraying a flicker of amusement. It is customary for new consorts to undergo a period of instruction. You must learn our culture, our traditions, and your responsibilities. Martin sighed, flopping back onto the bed. Fantastic. Alien etiquette lessons. Just what I always wanted. Cytherea stepped closer, her gaze softening. I understand this is difficult for you, but it is necessary. The court is watching closely and your actions reflect upon both of us. Martin propped himself up on one elbow, studying her. For all her poise and confidence, there was something in her voice, a trace of vulnerability she was trying to hide. Okay, he said after a moment. Fine, I'll do the orientation thing, but only because you asked nicely. Cytherea arched an eyebrow. I was not aware I had asked. Yeah, well, you've got that whole regal please do this or I'll disintegrate you vibe going on, Martin said with a grin. It's very convincing. To his surprise, Cytherea chuckled softly. Your humor is unique, Martin Hensley. Unique good or unique bad? He asked. She didn't answer directly, but the faint smile on her lips was enough. The orientation began in a room that looked like the offspring of a library and a hologram factory. Shelves of glowing crystalline tablets lined the walls, while floating displays projected scenes of Zalvonian history, culture, and, of course, etiquette. Martin sat at a sleek, curved desk, staring blankly at a holographic instructor who looked like someone had crossed an owl with a jellyfish. The instructor's voice was deep and melodic, but the content was, in Martin's opinion, mind-numbingly dull. And so, the instructor droned, the ceremonial bow must be executed at a precise angle of 32 degrees to convey the appropriate level of respect. Martin yawned, his head drooping. 32 degrees, got it. Super important. Can't have anyone thinking I'm disrespecting their bow angles. Martin, Cytherea said sharply, seated beside him. Pay attention. I am paying attention, Martin protested, sitting up straighter. Look, I even wrote it down. He held up a small, sleek tablet on which he had scrawled a crude doodle of an alien bowing. Cytherea gave him a withering look. Okay, fine, Martin muttered, setting the tablet down. But seriously, do I really need to know all this? Can't I just, wing it? Smile, shake hands, nod a lot? That usually works. Your actions have far-reaching consequences, Cytherea said, her tone firm. Every gesture, every word will be scrutinized. If you are not careful, you could inadvertently insult an entire delegation. Great, Martin said, slumping in his seat. No pressure or anything. The holographic instructor continued, launching into an explanation of Zalvonian dining customs. Martin tried to focus, but his mind kept wandering. He glanced at Cytherea, who was listening intently, her expression calm but focused. You really take this stuff seriously, huh? Martin said quietly. It is my duty, Cytherea replied without looking at him. Yeah, I get that, Martin said. But don't you ever, I don't know, wish you could just be normal for a day? No rules, no court, no responsibilities? Cytherea hesitated, her gaze flickering toward him. For a moment she seemed on the verge of saying something, but then she shook her head. Wishing does not change reality. Martin frowned. Maybe not, but it helps. You should try it sometime. She didn't respond, but the brief flicker of emotion in her eyes told him he'd struck a nerve. By the time the session ended, Martin's brain felt like it had been put through a blender. He staggered out of the room, rubbing his temples. I don't know how you do this every day, he said to Cytherea. It is not easy, she admitted, but it is necessary. Yeah, I'm starting to pick up on the theme here, Martin said. Necessary is basically your motto, isn't it? She gave him a sidelong glance. And what would your motto be, Martin Hensley? He grinned. Probably something like, when in doubt, make a joke and hope for the best. To his surprise, she laughed, a genuine melodic sound that seemed to catch even her off guard. Well, she said after a moment, I suppose there are worse mottos. As they walked back to their chambers, Martin felt a small but significant shift in the air between them. For all her regal composure, Cytherea was starting to let her guard down, just a little. And for the first time, Martin began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he could survive this crazy situation after all. Martin had always thought of formal dinners as stuffy affairs, the kind of events where people wore uncomfortable clothes and ate food so tiny it might as well be a garnish. The Zalvonian equivalent, however, was an entirely different beast. He stood at the entrance of the grand feasting hall, gaping at the spectacle before him. The room was enormous, shaped like an elongated oval with tiered platforms that descended toward the center, where a glowing crystalline table stretched endlessly, lined with alien dignitaries. Above them floated orbs of light that pulsed softly, casting a golden hue across the hall. The air was filled with the hum of conversation, the occasional sharp trill of laughter, and the faint aroma of something that smelled suspiciously like roasted marshmallows. At first glance, the food seemed relatively normal, fruits, meats, and drinks in various colors and forms. Then Martin noticed one of the dishes appeared to be wriggling. Please tell me that's not alive, he whispered to Cytherea, who stood beside him, regal and composed as ever. It is not, she said simply. That's not as reassuring as you think, Martin muttered, adjusting the high collar of his formal outfit. This one had even more embroidery than the last, and he felt like a walking piece of abstract art. The two of them began descending the steps, drawing the attention of the entire room. Conversations paused, and dozens of eyes, or their alien equivalents, fixed on them. Martin felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. Is it just me, or do these people always stare like they're trying to figure out if I'm edible? He asked under his breath. Perhaps they are, Cytherea replied, her tone neutral. Martin shot her a look. Was that a joke? Did you just make a joke? Of course not, she said smoothly, but the faintest twitch of her lips betrayed her amusement. They reached the central platform, where Varen awaited them, his expression as stern as ever. The advisor had an uncanny knack for looking like he was perpetually disapproving of something. Your Majesty, Varen said, bowing deeply to Cytherea before glancing at Martin. His bow to him was significantly shallower. I trust your consort is prepared for the proceedings? Define prepared, Martin said, earning a sharp glance from Cytherea. He is as prepared as he needs to be, Cytherea said smoothly, stepping forward to take her place at the head of the table. She gestured for Martin to sit beside her. As Martin settled into his seat, he noticed the dignitary across from him, a tall insectoid being with multifaceted eyes and delicate spindly limbs, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He offered an awkward smile and a small wave. The insectoid tilted its head, then made a clicking noise that Martin could only hope wasn't an insult. What do I do if I offend someone? Martin whispered to Cytherea as plates of food began materializing before them, transported by hovering trays. You will not offend anyone if you simply follow my lead, she replied. Martin snorted. Yeah, that's going to work great. I'm the guy who accidentally proposed to you by trying to make a toast. Cytherea gave him a sidelong glance. It is an unusual situation, she admitted. Unusual? Martin said, raising an eyebrow. That's putting it lightly. This is intergalactic level awkward. Their conversation was interrupted as Varen stepped forward to address the gathered guests. Honored dignitaries, esteemed members of the court, he began, his voice carrying easily across the hall. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the union of our queen with her chosen consort. Martin winced as a murmur rippled through the crowd. The words chosen consort seemed to spark a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and, he was pretty sure, thinly veiled amusement. Great, he muttered under his breath. I'm the main course of the evening. Silence, Cytherea whispered sharply. Varen continued, his tone formal and deliberate. As is tradition, the consort must participate in the rite of concordance, a ceremony symbolizing unity and mutual understanding between worlds. Martin froze. The what now? Cytherea turned to him, her expression unreadable. It is a simple ritual. You will address the court and answer a single question posed by a representative of the dignitaries. Address the court? Martin hissed. I didn't sign up for a public speech. It is customary, Cytherea said. Martin groaned, slumping slightly in his seat. Of course it is. What's the question? It will depend on the representative, Cytherea said, her voice calm but firm. You must respond honestly and with confidence. They will be judging your character. Martin let out a soft, nervous laugh. Oh, good. No pressure. As Varen finished his introduction, an elder Zalvonian dignitary rose from the far end of the table. The representative was a striking figure, with a tall, willowy frame and robes that shimmered like starlight. Their voice, when they spoke, was melodic yet commanding. Consort of the Queen, the dignitary said, their glowing eyes fixed on Martin. What do you believe is the most important quality in a ruler? Martin blinked. The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. He glanced at Cytherea, who gave him a barely perceptible nod, urging him to answer. His mind raced. Honesty, strength, intelligence. What did they want to hear? But then, as he looked around the room, at the skeptical stares, the murmured whispers, and even Cytherea's carefully composed mask, he realized something. They didn't want to hear the right answer. They wanted to hear his answer. Martin took a deep breath, standing and addressing the room. I think, he began, his voice steadier than he expected, the most important quality in a ruler is knowing that you don't have all the answers. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but he pressed on. Look, I'm not a ruler. I'm just a guy who stumbled into this whole thing by accident, but I think what makes a great leader is realizing that you can't do it alone. You need people who challenge you, support you, and keep you grounded. And maybe, just maybe, if you surround yourself with the right people, you can figure it out together. The room fell silent. Martin glanced nervously at Cytherea, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Finally, the dignitary inclined their head. A thoughtful response, they said. Let us hope your actions reflect your words. Martin sat back down, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure if he'd passed whatever test this was, but at least he hadn't tripped over his own words or his own feet. Cytherea leaned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. That was unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? Martin whispered back. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Good. For the first time that evening, Martin felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely out of his depth. The first thing Martin learned about intergalactic diplomacy was that it was mind-numbingly boring. The second thing he learned was that boring didn't mean easy. He sat in a grand chamber known as the Hall of Concord, surrounded by delegates from over a dozen different species, each more bizarre and intimidating than the last. The room itself was a marvel of alien design, gleaming metallic walls adorned with pulsating glyphs, ceilings that stretched impossibly high, and a central dais that shimmered with a constant holographic projection of the Zalvonian galaxy. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His formal robes, while slightly less ostentatious than before, still felt like they'd been designed by someone with a vendetta against comfort. Am I supposed to understand any of this? He whispered to Cytherea, who sat beside him, her posture impeccable and her expression unreadable. No, she replied quietly, her eyes fixed on the proceedings. Your role is to observe and learn. Great, Martin muttered, Observing is my favorite. The meeting was in full swing, with various delegates taking turns to address the room. Martin struggled to keep track of who was who. There was the towering, crystalline entity whose voice sounded like a wind chime caught in a storm, the small rodent-like diplomat who spoke in rapid-fire bursts, and the amphibian-like figure whose words were translated by a hovering sphere. Every now and then, Cytherea would lean toward him and offer a brief explanation. "They are discussing trade agreements," she said at one point. "Specifically, the regulation of starship fuel exports in the Talthir sector." Martin blinked. "That's what they're arguing about? Fuel exports?" "It is a matter of great importance," Cytherea said. "Sure," Martin said, trying not to yawn. "Super important. Riveting stuff." As the hours dragged on, Martin found his mind wandering. He began to imagine what his friends back on Earth would think if they could see him now, sitting in a room full of aliens, trying not to fall asleep while intergalactic politics unfolded around him. It was the kind of thing he'd have laughed at if it weren't happening to him. "Martin." Cytherea's voice snapped him back to reality. "Huh?" "What?" he said, sitting up straighter. "It is your turn to speak," she said, her tone calm but firm. Martin's stomach dropped. "Wait, what? Nobody told me I'd have to say something." "I informed you this morning," Cytherea said, her gaze steady. "You did?" Martin racked his brain but came up blank. "Was that before or after the 12-course breakfast?" "Now is not the time for excuses," Cytherea said. "You will address the delegates and reaffirm your commitment to the principles of unity and cooperation." Martin stared at her. "Reaffirm my what now?" Before he could protest further, all eyes in the room turned to him. The murmurs quieted, and an expectant silence fell over the chamber. Martin stood slowly, trying to ignore the way his palms were sweating. His mind raced for something, anything, to say that wouldn't make him look like a complete idiot. Hi," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "I'm Martin. You probably already know that, though. Kind of hard to miss the new guy, right?" A few of the delegates exchanged puzzled looks while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Anyway," Martin continued, "I just wanted to say that, I'm honored to be here. Really. I mean, this is all pretty overwhelming, to be honest. Back on Earth, the biggest thing I had to deal with was deciding whether to get fries or onion rings with my burger." A ripple of amusement spread through the room. Cytherea shot him a warning glance, but Martin pressed on. "But seriously," he said, his tone softening, "I get that this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Different worlds, different cultures, trying to find a way to work together. And I don't know much about intergalactic diplomacy, but I do know that cooperation isn't easy. It takes effort, it takes patience, and sometimes it takes a lot of awkward conversations." He glanced at Cytherea, who was watching him intently. "But it's worth it," Martin said, "because when we work together, we're stronger, and honestly, I think that's pretty amazing." He sat down to a smattering of applause, polite, reserved, but genuine. Cytherea leaned toward him, her voice low. "That was adequate." "Gee, thanks," Martin muttered. After the meeting, Martin found himself cornered by one of the delegates, a reptilian being with iridescent scales and a voice like gravel. "You speak well, human," the delegate said, their yellow eyes narrowing. Thanks," Martin said, unsure if it was a compliment or a threat. "But words are only the beginning," the delegate continued. "We will be watching to see if your actions match them." "No pressure," Martin said with a nervous laugh. The delegate didn't respond, simply inclining their head before slithering away. Cytherea appeared at his side, her expression thoughtful. "You made an impression," she said. "Good impression or bad impression?" Martin asked. "That remains to be seen," Cytherea said. "But they are paying attention. That is a start." Martin sighed. "This whole consort to the queen thing is way more complicated than I thought." "It is not a role to be taken lightly," Cytherea said. Yeah, I'm getting that, Martin said. He glanced at her. How do you do it? Stay so composed all the time? It is my duty, she said simply. Martin frowned. Yeah, but don't you ever feel like, I don't know, just being yourself for once? No titles, no court, no pressure. Cytherea hesitated, her gaze distant. That is not a luxury I can afford. Martin was about to respond when Varen appeared, his expression as severe as ever. Your Majesty, Varen said, bowing slightly. There is a matter that requires your attention. Cytherea nodded, her composure snapping back into place. Of course, excuse me, Martin. As she walked away, Martin couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her than the perfect, unshakable queen everyone else saw. And if there was, maybe he'd find a way to see it. Martin had always believed in happy endings, though his definition of one had drastically shifted since the day he accidentally proposed to an alien queen. What started as an impulsive mistake had transformed into a journey that had tested every ounce of his patience, wit, and courage. And now, standing on the observation deck of the Royal Zalvonian starship as it floated serenely in orbit around its twin suns, Martin wasn't sure what came next, but for once he wasn't worried. The air on the deck was thick with the hum of energy fields and the faint aroma of alien blossoms. Cytherea stood beside him, her figure illuminated by the warm golden light of the suns. She wore no royal regalia tonight, just a simple gown of flowing silver fabric that shimmered like moonlight. It was a rare sight, seeing her without the weight of her crown or her carefully constructed composure. You're quiet, Martin said, breaking the silence. Cytherea glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I have much to consider. About what happened down there? He asked, nodding toward the planet below. The official summit had ended only hours ago, with an agreement that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. Trade disputes resolved, alliances forged, and a particularly angry reptilian delegate begrudgingly pacified. That, she said with a faint smile, and everything else. Martin leaned on the railing, his gaze drifting to the stars. Do you think it'll last? The alliance, I mean? Cytherea was silent for a moment. Perhaps, she said finally, but it will require vigilance. The galaxy is vast, and old wounds are slow to heal. Trust must be earned and maintained. Right, Martin said, letting out a long sigh. Guess that means more speeches, more awkward dinners, and more trying not to offend anyone situations. Cytherea turned to him fully, her expression softening. You handled yourself admirably, Martin. More than I expected. He raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? Did I just get a royal seal of approval? Do not let it go to your head, she said, though there was a hint of warmth in her tone. Martin grinned. Too late. They stood in companionable silence for a while, the twin suns dipping lower on the horizon of the planet below. Martin marveled at the surreal beauty of it all, this life he'd stumbled into, this strange and vibrant world he now called home. Can I ask you something? He said after a while. You may, Cytherea replied. Why me? He asked, his voice quieter now. Of all the people in the galaxy, why'd you decide to stick with me? I mean, I'm just a guy from Earth. I don't know anything about ruling a kingdom or negotiating intergalactic treaties. Half the time, I don't even know which fork to use at dinner. Cytherea studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. You are unlike anyone I have ever known, she said finally. You see the world with a simplicity and sincerity that is rare among leaders. You do not seek power or prestige. You act out of instinct, and though your methods are unconventional, your intentions are always genuine. Martin blinked, taken aback. Wow, that was way deeper than I expected. Cytherea allowed herself a small smile. You asked. Well, Martin said, rubbing the back of his neck, for what it's worth, I think you're pretty amazing too. You're strong, smart, and terrifying in the best way possible. Her smile widened just a fraction. Terrifying. In a good way, Martin said quickly. Like you're the kind of person who can stare down a room full of angry aliens and make them listen. I could never do that. You underestimate yourself, she said. Maybe, he admitted. But I think that's okay. I mean, I'm learning. And honestly, I wouldn't have made it this far without you. Cytherea looked away, her gaze returning to the stars. We have come a long way, haven't we? Yeah, Martin said, his voice soft. We really have. The next day, the palace was alive with celebration. The summit's success had sparked a wave of hope across the Zalvonian Empire, and a grand festival had been declared. The streets were filled with music, laughter, and the glow of bioluminescent decorations. Martin wandered through the festivities, trying his best to blend in, though his earthling status made that nearly impossible. People greeted him with cautious curiosity, some even bowing, which still made him feel weird. He spotted Cytherea near the central plaza, surrounded by a crowd of admirers and officials. Despite the chaos around her, she remained poised, her presence commanding as ever. Martin hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but then her eyes met his, and she gave him the faintest nod. Taking a deep breath, he made his way over. Enjoying the party? He asked, trying to sound casual. It is lively, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Yeah, I noticed, Martin said with a grin. I think someone offered me a glowing drink earlier. Pretty sure it wasn't safe for humans, though. Cytherea's lips twitched. You are wise to be cautious. They stood together, watching as the crowd danced and celebrated around them. So, Martin said after a while, what happens now? Now, Cytherea said, we move forward. Together. Martin glanced at her, surprised by the weight of her words. Together, he repeated, a smile tugging at his lips. I think I can live with that. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Martin didn't feel out of place. He didn't feel like the earthling who had accidentally stumbled into a world far beyond his understanding. He felt like he belonged.